long to be alone. I long to be in the temple. We must find our way back home, and we can be in the temple. Let's all go to the temple.
Welcome to day 5 in the temple. It's Churning Day. We are having all kinds of fun today with our internet connections. Billy, you're there at the moment. How's it going?
I know, it's feeling very, very churny for me today, I must say. This is the day of vigorous activity, and it's sort of the polar opposite to yesterday, I think. Sort of on the ground, I'm in a situation where I came to a little town called Newton Abbot to get my car serviced, and today they basically said I have to get my back tyres fixed before I make my pilgrimage next week up to Middlesbrough to pick up the vinyl. So yeah, I was confronted with a choice, which was go home and not get the tyres, and potentially have a more secure connection, or the opposite, which is what I'm doing now, which is waiting whilst I'm in a cafe.
Well,
And this all makes perfect sense as far as I'm concerned.
churning sounds going on in the background. Maybe if you sit back a little bit further from your camera, you
Yeah.
might be slightly better in shot.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't know if
Yeah.
that works.
Yeah, I'm also on my phone, so
It-
posture is a thing.
Yes, indeed. Posture is a thing. So,
The thing that I'm most proud about already today is that I have I have a whisk borrowed from the cafe kitchen.
I think while we've definitely got you here, I think we need to put you in
Yes.
full view. I'm going to solo you, and you can do your whisk solo, Billy. Take it away.
I'll do my whisk solo. So here we are on this day of churning. It's a day which is it's got a lot of possibilities as we usher in the weekend, and what that means is we're preparing the hearth. So it's a day that also involves cleaning and pushing the dust away. So I always think of this day in the temple series as being kind of diverse. So sometimes this fifth note that you get within the series is a semitone higher, and that just introduces that little twist of different possibilities. It's the sort of catalyst to go over the edge, to reinvent the psyche after going in deep and going to that liminal space, really. And I think this day also has quite a lot to do with sex. It has a lot to do with Venus, and interesting thing about Venus is that she is represented sort of now in our culture as a sort of very fluffy version of femininity, but being connected to Aphrodite, she had this wild sort of foaming brine kind of side to her as well. So that's all there in this activity of churning and making butter, and it doesn't have to be butter in the traditional sense. I made an awful lot of oat milk in lockdown, and then we also have the cleaning aspect as well. So the where we had washing on Monday, which was a kind of cleansing. This is more the kind of dry sort of shifting of landscapes that we get coming into the weekend and coming into the possibility of sharing together, beyond this day. I also, in the sort of cosmology, I suppose, of the temple and with relation to climate change, I actually call this time that we're in generally, like more generally, the churning time. I
Right.
suppose perhaps it's sort of the shadow side of the great humbling. You know, it's sort of it's a fluxy time. It's lots of things are changing, and the time at which I wrote the song that we'll hear today, Black Swan, it was sort of late December, early January, at the end of 2020, going into 2021. And, you know, the UK was experiencing yet another lockdown. And I suppose what really struck me was that a lot of the narratives that we were hearing were kind of stuck. And, you know, this song offers the hope in the form of a black swan, in the form of a black swan event, that something can come into our view that we didn't expect. And it's not that we're necessarily any less broken, but that the terms in which we are broken are different than, you know, what the map originally suggested. So yeah, I think that probably connects quite a lot to stuff, you know, related to what you work on, you know, School Called Home, and I suppose a lot of these lyrics came out of. This is probably the track which most, you know, most fits School Called Home, like in a, I guess, in a sort of theoretical, philosophical kind of way.
Well, do you think is that our
Said a
cue?
lot there.
Yeah. Hello, Martine, who's just said hello to us. Welcome, folks who are watching along.
Hi.
Billy, do you think that's our cue to play today's track?
Do we dare? I wonder if there's anything else I need to say about it.
Yeah, go
Just
for it.
you
Tell
know,
us a bit more before we put it on.
Hopefully, the cream comes to the top at the end. The in terms of like the band, this kind of highlights Anna Batson, who plays bassoon, and what a wonderful surname for a bassoon player, Anna Batsoon. Batson. So she is, I suppose, by nature of the fact she plays bassoon, but also herself, you know, she is very humorous. And my sense about this day is that it is kind of like it's the moment of paradigm shift where things change a bit. So yeah, the bassoon really propels us on this track into something. It's probably the most uplifting. You know, this is the Europop track on the album. This is Black Swan.
All right, let's have a listen.
As we journey through the process, somehow we got to Churning Day, a rupture in the myth of progress. Behold the chart of exponential decay.
Wow. There we are. Are you feeling churned, Billy?
I'm feeling very churned. Yeah, that's interesting. How that word sort of works in our culture, isn't it? It's sort of. I think we often use it in a sense of like feeling slightly sick.
Yeah, quite churned up, like just sort of thrown around. I mean, I love that line. There's no other mess than the mess we're in. I was also thinking as I was
That's
listening,
right.
there can't be many 5-piece ensembles where one of the five is a bassoon. It's quite a lineup
Well,
that you've
quite.
got.
This is the thing. I spent years like searching for the right bass player that wasn't me because I love playing bass, but like I need to be able to play keys as well, you know. And then suddenly there was this moment where I realised bassoon. I love the bassoon. Anna's great, and why not? You know, bassoon and drums. It's a new
Yeah.
genre. I also need to make mention, as not just because she's listening, but Martine's on that track as well. Martine Multi singing
Ah,
vocals on the middle and on the end as well. So
wonderful.
it's lovely to reprise our partnership there a little bit. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that was one of the many things on the album that was sort of flown in. You know, it was remotely recorded, and also Martine sent me some great video which goes into the lockdown demo version of that as well. Um, yeah, where do you want to start with this one?
So, one of the ways that we've been talking about this cycle of the week is as something which maps onto the creative process. So, where does the churning come? Like, what's going on Churning Day in the
Oh dear,
process of
I've lost you
writing
now,
a
David.
song or bringing anything
Keep
into
talking.
reality? Ah, okay, exciting. We've got all churned up, and Billy's been churned away. So I'm on talking duty for a bit longer, and we'll see if she resurfaces in a moment, like the cream floating to the top of the churn. We have we have some old milk churns that turned up in the Red House here at a school called Home, because I own some butter churns, in fact, for making butter from the milk. Because we have this huge old red Swedish barn at the bottom of the garden, which we're slowly turning into a schoolhouse. And when we bought the property here, we got it without it being put out on general sale. And one of the reasons why the guy whose family had it for 3 generations since it was built, one of the reasons why I think he took our offer of the asking price was because we said you can leave behind anything that you can't deal with. And he said later that he'd had 5 years since he retired and closed the shoe shop. The shoe shop being the space that I'm sitting in as I talk to you, which is our main event space as well as my workspace here at the school. But he said he'd spent 5 years since he shut the shoe shop, kind of dreading having to deal with the 3 generations of stuff that had accumulated, particularly about out there in the back in the Red House. Hello, Billy, welcome back. I've just been telling
I'm
people
in
that
the
we actually have
broadcast apparently.
some wooden Swedish butter churns among all of the things that
Let's
we
see.
acquired in the Red House when we moved here. Oh, gone again. We'll see. Maybe Billy will be back in a moment. Maybe I'll spend the rest of the time telling you about all of the other things that were in the Red House. Because as Ulf, who we bought the place from, as he said, well, in the old days we didn't have, there wasn't a recycling centre or a council tip where you could take stuff. So stuff had just been stuck into the barn, into what we call the Great Hall upstairs in the barn. And so we've inherited 3 generations of that, including several old butter churns. Billie, how are you doing there? Have you been fully churned up and down?
I'm doing all right.
Cool.
Yeah, I think so. Kept trying to reconnect, but
So
just wasn't happening.
I
But
was
you seem
asked.
to have 5 years, so you're doing something right.
Well,
Shall I leave you to it?
I was asking you before where the churning comes within a creative process, like what's going on at this stage of the process of writing a song, of creating anything that you map onto this 7-day cycle.
I mean, yeah, I suppose it's the bit after all the groundwork, really. You know, it's the bit where you sort of you know your direction at least, or you know your impetus,
Hmm.
and stuff just needs kind of cobbling together. Like it's that bit where you're kind of just in a sort of maelstrom of. I guess the inspiration has happened, and it's sort of like pulling back a spring and letting it go.
Hmm.
But you're not quite sure exactly which angle it's going to ricochet off. So yeah, like in the process of actually writing this song, whereas yesterday's song was written over this 7-week period, where like I was embodying each of those stages of brewing. This one was done sort of purposefully a bit quicker. Like I still spent 7 weeks on it,
Hmm.
but the kind of the connection with time was different. And I guess I knew that had to be the case because, this is the interesting thing about the album is that I'm kind of both being the thing I'm being the thing I'm describing as well as describing it. Which some might say that was like sort of pure kind of I'm kind of going further than the rapper that keeps naming themselves. Um, but like to me, that is also the fractal kind of nature of reality as well. Um, and also like I suppose by this point in the process, I sort of felt like anything was allowed in a way. And I suppose I always use like what I've done melodically to sort of describe the differences in the tunes. And this one, I'm still using that series, but there's many more turns than there would be, and there's many more sort of horizontal layers. And what I love is that this is the point in the album where the order of the notes kind of changes, and it's I guess what I've created harmonically is a kind of possibly the perception that it's a random chord sequence, but actually it's like it is still firmly rooted in that series. So yeah, it's kind of getting as far away from the expected as possible. And what I really wanted for this song was for it to was to be a surprise, was to be unexpected because that's what it's all about.
Well,
Like the
there's a
hokey pokey.
thing. There's a thing that you've touched on a few
So at the
times.
moment, I feel like I'm only able to talk and I'm not able to listen because, again, you are a still frame.
Okay, so I don't know whether you're hearing me at the moment or not, Billie, but what I was going to say is there's something that you've touched on a few times in the course of this week, and it came back again there, which is this thing of not just describing what you're writing about, what you're singing about, but actually being it, inhabiting the thing. And what comes to mind for me when I'm listening to you talk about that, and I realise we've lost Billie at the moment, so this is just me riffing on this with you folks who are watching along. But I'm a big fan of a strange man called Gordon White, who's a chaos magician and permaculturist and podcaster and various other things. and really actually a kind of fascinating outsider scholar and thinker. And I remember something from him that I quoted on The Great Humbling, which is the podcast that I do with Ed Gillespie, where we did an episode in the early weeks of the war in Ukraine. And we called the episode, Are We Going to Talk About Ukraine? Because it felt like that was all anyone was talking about, and what did we have to add? And yet, in some sense, we did have certain things that we wanted to say. So welcome back, Billie. I'm just telling people about something that's been coming to mind for me when you say this thing that you've said a few times this week about not just describing the thing, but being the thing of that day. Oh, there we go. Billie's been churned around again. Maybe she'll be back. Maybe it's just me and you guys for the rest of the time. But so the thing that Gordon White talks about, he says, don't pray for peace, pray peace. And he says this comes from, oh, here comes Billie again. Maybe we'll manage to tell Billie this story now. Billie, are you back with us?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
So
I'm going to tell you the thing I've just been telling everyone, which is about Gordon White, the chaos magician and permaculturist and general wonderful, glorious madman, who said something that I quoted from him around the start of the Ukraine war, where he said, don't pray for peace, pray peace. And it came to him from the Andean shamanic tradition that he's trained in, where his teacher was like, you don't pray for rain, you pray rain. Like, you bring yourself into the field of rain, you bring yourself into the field of peace. You become the thing, you merge with the thing that you were attempting to bring into the world. And so every time you've spoken about this thing of not just describing, but being, what that's called for on each of the days, that's what's been coming to mind for me.
Yes, which actually connects to what I realised about each day, for want of a better word, capital D, which is that the songs needed to be sung to the day rather than about the day, so that it was something that was being honoured, and that the day was inviting me to sort of partake in with it, rather than sort of being held on high, as the sort of perhaps more traditional image of a god, or at least the kind of, I don't know, the Christian image of a god that was handed down to me by many of the roots.
So
yeah, like singing to something, like singing to the mountain, rather than describing the mountain to other humans.
Right. Yeah. No, taking seriously the address of what you're doing as a participation in a world. I mean, we talked about this with the brewing yesterday, that the brewing of all of the tasks of all of the days is the one where there is clearly there is agency in this process that is not human and that has to be respected, because the yeast is going to set the tempo of the brewing, and that's where the kind of stillness that we found ourselves at partway through the call kind of came out of that. Whereas today is much more the release of energy, and it's kind of jagged and jumpy, and running around in the garden, hacking up pieces of wood and branches and so on all day. So it's definitely it's a day of busyness. I was going to, something I read yesterday after the call that sort of right into the middle of what we've been talking about this week, I was going to share with you and see what you make of it. Now, this is from John Michael Greer, who is someone we published in Dark Mountain, fascinating thinker, another magician. It's clearly there's a lot of magic on Churning Day, it seems. He for years he wrote the Archbruid Report, and these days his site is called Eco Sophia. He still writes a weekly essay there. And yesterday's work, he was talking about René Guénon, who's an esoteric figure from the early 20th century from France. And what Greer is doing with these essays is kind of sorting the wheat from the chaff a bit from his point of view, from various different people's ideas about enchantment and historical processes of disenchantment, or however we talk about it. And the thing that he gets from the title of one of Guénon's books and the ideas in the book is this thing of the reign of quantity. So Guénon has a very kind of it's all been going downhill sort of story of the trajectory of human history, or at least the recent parts of it. And his version of that Greer is saying is kind of an interesting one, is the move from a world of quality to a world of quantity, and a realm of quantity, a reign of quantity, where there is an assumption of homogeneity. And so he talks about, and this is Greer talking here, he says, in the same way, the idea of sacred days and times implies that time is not a uniform thing, distinguished only by arbitrary numbers. Qualitative times have their own distinct meaning and spirit. The sacred calendars are among the ways these are mapped. Most people nowadays assume as a matter of course that all such distinctions are arbitrary. But this is simply another reflection of the reign of quantity, that time might not be a uniform commodity to be chopped up and packaged by industrial society in any convenient manner is unthinkable to those who can only see quantities when they look at the world. And I think that, what you're doing, however playfully and kind of trying quite hard to steer away from anything that might come across as being dogmatic. Nonetheless, what you're doing is a sort of experiment with coming out the far side of the reign of quantity and asserting a qualitative structure of time that is also about reclaiming time and reclaiming the shape of our lives from the industrial homogeneity and uniformity and interchangeability of the days, and times, and hours, and shapes of our life.
I really like that, and it really can definitely connect to something that I've been doing for longer than just this album. Which I suppose is kind of back to what we were talking about. There was a time when I was more rebellious, but the question is kind of what was I rebelling from? And I remember actually it's there in my very first solo album. There's a track called Inhibitions, and it starts by saying a day is not enough to take me to the state of consciousness that keeps me awake. And a lot of that was to do with not just sleep and my sort of grappling with that, but also I suppose how it felt like time was something imposed, rather than if you're not from a society which really honors the harvest, then the meaning has gone, or the meaning is when you think about quantity, everything is equal in that world. I mean, that's the problem with that world, isn't it? That seconds are 1 second is just as significant as another, and not in a spiritual sense. I think I'm going somewhere with that anyway.
Yeah. No, this is. I mean, there's. I'm thinking of an essay in the Development Dictionary, which is a fascinating book that was written by a whole gang of people who were friends of Ivan Illich around the beginning of the 1990s. And they take these key words, the words that are kind of sort of motherhood and apple pie They're so like they connote such a sense of goodness and virtue that it's almost like swearing in church to question them. A lot of the words, anyway, that are kind of at the centre of the story and the project of
I see.
international development is kind of the main frame of
Yeah.
the book. And one of those chapters is on equality and the kind of very different things that can be riding under that name, and the sort of unhelpful jamming together of, on the one hand, some things that I think we want to speak for and stand for about what's often expressed in terms of the equal worth of everyone, which, if you look at it historically and culturally, actually, does have there's a strong Christian lineage to that kind of idea of equality. If you compare it to assumptions that have structured other societies, although it's not exclusively, it's something that you also find in various indigenous cultures as well. But equality as a word can also refer to literally the absence of quality, the absence of qualitative distinction, which is what you're talking about, the sort of the interchangeability, the idea that, there is no uniqueness, that we're all just kind of cogs that can be swapped in and out of a machine, and that's the shadow side of of the world modernity produces. Let's say we're going all sorts of
Yes,
places.
it's the content provider,
Yes, right, the content provider.
Well, it's just that this thing, isn't there? Like the CEO of Spotify, he basically said, well, you musicians who are complaining about not getting anything, well, you just need to create more, don't you?
Yes.
And yeah, I can't really do that.
No.
Without it affecting, qualitatively affecting things.
Well, this is interesting because this sort of takes us to the hot topic of the day in terms of AI, artificial intelligence within quotation marks. And there are so many takes, there is so much being said about AI at the moment, and I've felt absolutely no need to add to it or even to enthuse about any of the things that I've read. But today, L.M. Sakasas, who writes a Substack called The Convivial Society, who's a kind of media scholar, again, someone very inspired by Illich, wrote a piece which was the first thing that's really resonated with me about AI, which was about AI as the sort of the ultimate embodiment of modernity's assumptions about the world, which is also the place at which that gets pushed to its kind of absurd limit. And so AI is both the ultimate embodiment of and the moment of the falling apart of the story modernity has told itself about the world and how life should be organized, and what kind of a world we're in, and what intelligence is like, and what technology is for, and how we relate to it, and the rest of it. And so the threat isn't the sort of the dreams that of nightmares that are conjured up by the true believers in AI of what it's going to do to humanity. But actually, it's more that AI is the ultimate content provider. AI is the musicians that the CEO of Spotify wants, and the rest of it. But that also means it's the point where the absurdity and the brokenness of that becomes unignorable. And so there's a kind of hopeful apocalyptic story to be told about this, where AI almost is a kind of like an emperor's new clothes moment for what's left of modernity.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So it's like the shadow side is sort of exposed purely.
Yeah, or just the kind of the absurdity of what it takes seriously is so nakedly absurd that it gets harder for anyone to take it seriously. Something like
I
that.
see. Yeah.
I'm going to have to chew on this a bit more and
Yeah.
probably write
That's
something.
right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, it's always interesting, to I suppose to be aware of how how we are of a certain age, and we weren't brought up with the internet in the way that today's kids are, and I think I suppose I think a lot about, well, it's this question again of what is left, and obviously what is left is a question which the answer depends on like where you're standing to ask it. And I suppose like in terms of climate change, like I think what happened in the last 5 years, like with XR and also with Greta Thunberg, and also this really connects to this song because Fridays for Future, and that was kind of in my head as well, like when I wrote this. But I suppose like it's the simple thing of like there is hope in the younger generations as well, and obviously like I remember when you first had your child, that was a reappraising of like what hope means, and why it's important, and like there's another resonance there, which is like as somebody who hasn't had children yet, like zooming out on this whole experience for me, like definitely when I started caring for that 90-year-old lady, it was the closest that I'd ever felt to having a child. She's not a child, but at the same time, like I'm giving her a bed bath every morning, and
Yeah.
so there was that feeling. I was absolutely connected to not just the fact that I was doing that for her, but also the realization of what she must have done, like for her children as well. So just like on a from the point of view of a personal journey, like it was, I felt like taking that on, I was like crossing into a kind of parenthood, and that that connects to like me. I mean, this is all kind of personal stuff, but sort of getting away from the idea of like there's a shamanic sort of battle that needs to be had to like creativity for me now I think is much more about like caretakership and that kind of curation.
Yes. So that's an interesting
As
word,
somebody typing something.
to be a caretaker. So what's kind of bubbling for me or getting sort of churned up for me just at the moment is, so that thing you're describing of finding yourself in a position of care, in a position, and this is something that, so I'm reading Mary Harrington's book Feminism Against Progress, and one of the things that she talks about is
Right.
how becoming a mother for her was a kind of revelation of the story of liberal individualism and the ideas of freedom of modernity, because you're in a, like, it's like those stories and those ideas and ideals work for us at certain times in our lives, but actually the responsibility of
Yeah.
care puts us into a very different place, whether that's as a parent, which is often the kind of archetypal example, or in your case being a carer, working, looking after and being responsible for an elderly person. In all of these situations we have to exercise a very different kind of power to the kinds of power that, again, that modernity might have valorized or that heroic narratives valorize. I'm thinking of when Anthony McCann's talking about and politics of gentleness. And that, you know, we often define power. We talked about this when we were doing the project that led to the Other Place album, that uh,
Yeah.
we often define power, Anthony says, in a way that makes it something we wouldn't want to have. We define power as the ability to control, dominate, manipulate, to make people do what we want. And if we've defined that,
Exactly.
and we're
Yeah.
not, we don't want to be controlling, dominating, manipulative people, then we've rendered ourselves powerless. So we have to broaden the set of kinds of power that might exist if we don't want to make ourselves powerless. And he says, if you want an image of what gentle power looks like, what other kinds of power can look like, then think of when you're holding a baby, or when you're caring for a 90-year-old, giving her a bed bath. Like, these are situations in which you have a lot of power over someone who is more vulnerable than you. And, so you have to show up in a relation of care. You have to be a caretaker, a taker of care, in that sense that you were speaking about before.
Absolutely. And I suppose this goes straight into, like, back into what we were talking about in terms of leadership.
Yes.
It's like finding the kind of leadership which invites, and that's definitely like the path that I've been on. And this project feels like the sort of closest I've come to realizing that.
Well,
I'm aware it's somehow got to 3:30.
it has, yeah. No, we're coming to the end of today's session, and I was so skeptical. We had so much technical churn before we came on air. I wasn't even sure we were going to manage to sustain a call today. But
and we've no, quiet, and we've barely scratched the surface of the lyrics. But like, obviously, there is a sense in which a lot of those lyrics have been covered. In A School Called Home, there's a lot of Martin Shaw in there. Also, I think it might be nice just to end with like the last verse lyric, which is about being alive to unfolding melody.
Yeah, that feels like a good place to land on this churning day. We've got Eric joining us from Canada, and Martin, and here we are. This is now we're seeing on the screen the whisk of churning. We are sending our churned, clotted, creamy greetings to all of you wherever you're watching us from. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow, and tomorrow we'll be baking.
We will indeed.